Perfect. That's an absolute wonderful way to describe and to explain to our listeners what's going on. And I wanted to follow up on, you talked about having the memory, but not the emotional response. And I want to say a few things about that and then ask you some questions. As a hypnotherapist, I do similar stuff with my hypnotherapy. We have memories. Things happen to us. People say things. We read things. We smell, taste, feel, experience things. They are things that happen to us. No, we don't want to get rid of the memory. It's just those horrific emotions that we cannot control that become a problem for us. And it's not like you have forgotten that you moved to Australia and had a bad breakup. You know that you did. You can take yourself back, I'm guessing, and still get yourself riled up about that if you choose to do so. But the point is, you are no longer choosing to do so, and that connection's been broken, and you feel okay. And then once you feel okay, you get a different level of understanding. Oh, it might not be about the breakup. It might remind me of something that happened in childhood, which also creates another response. And then there's another layer, and then there's another layer. And earlier, like you said, the secondary gain. There's a part of me that wants to feel justified. It feels good to be the victim sometimes. And there's no shame in admitting that. You know, if listeners are out there thinking, well, wait a minute, it's bad to be a victim. Yeah, but come on, let's be real. Sometimes it feels good to be like, oh, this happened to me, and blah, 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 and we get attention, and we feel justified, and it makes sense. And EFT can help unpeel those layers and get at what is really going on, and allows us to choose what responses we are or are not going to have in any given situation.
That's absolutely right. And when we have that feeling of like, oh, this feels so bad, there's often it shouldn't have happened kind of message, which when you examine it shouldn't have happened, there's really kind of two parts to you when you say that. There's the part of you saying it happened, and the other part going, patting you on the back and saying, and it shouldn't have, which is why I think why it's comforting. That's my kind of the way that I kind of understood it. But something else that you said, when you said that with EFT, you can still have the reaction if you really want to go there, but you choose not to. Actually, I have some good news for you. You can't have that reaction even if you try.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Once you clear it. So what if I'm working with somebody and they're focusing on, say, their sadness over something someone said to them? Like, let's say they have a memory of when they were 12 years old and their mother said, no one's ever going to love you. You know, and the incredible sadness that they feel when they think about that. And every time they've thought about that or talked about that with someone, they get teary, they feel upset. And like you said about peeling the layers, we use the analogy of peeling the onion. So it might start as sadness when we're tapping. And that sadness might be what we call like a SUD level, subjective units of distress, we call it, as a way of keeping track of intensity, might be like a 9 out of 10. We might be tapping with somebody who's, you know, in their early 40s. So this happened a long time ago. They tap through that sadness that goes down to maybe a 0. And then there's anger that they didn't even know was there. The next layer of the onion is, I'm actually really angry that she said that. How dare they? And they tap the anger down. Maybe it was a 7. They tap that down to a 2. And then suddenly another layer of sadness. And that's a 5. And they tap that down to a 0. When that onion is gone, a client will apologize to me for not being able to feel the feeling anymore. I'll say, so now what's the intensity of the sadness? And they'll go, I'm sorry, I just can't feel any sadness. I'm sorry. I'm just laughing going, because I say to clients, try to feel as much as you can. You won't be able to feel anything that isn't there anymore. And one way you know it's cleared is you're bored now. So a story you've been telling your whole life and all the same emotions come up. You cannot, your mind drifts off it. You lose interest in it. You can't dredge up the emotion even if you try. And what you also mentioned, which is you have a new insight, that's called a cognitive shift in tapping. I'm sure it's called that in other ways, but in other modalities. That happens automatically when you clear the emotional reaction suddenly, and there are reasons for this having to do with the brain. And the film that I finished that you mentioned, The Science of Tapping,
yes,
actually goes into why. But what happens is the smarter, more evolved part of you, which is always there, Suddenly you can hear that part of you, and that part of you goes, oh, I suddenly get why my mother said that. Oh, she said that because she was, being tormented by my dad's, excessive drinking, and she was lashing out. Oh, I get that now. I'm not angry. I'm not sad. I'm not 12 years old anymore when I think about that. I'm now a 43-year-old going, yeah, my 31-year-old mom didn't have a lot of tools and she was struggling, that kind of thing. But you can't think your way to that point.
No.
It arises naturally. I mean, you can try, but your body is still going to have the reaction. But what tapping does is it clears it to the point where it really isn't there anymore. And then that's what the freedom is. It's gone from your body. So the things that those kinds of pressures cause ongoing stress, for example, you can have health issues because of things that are unresolved that you don't even remember. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced this when you work with people in hypnosis. Things come up that maybe are connected to a struggle they're having in their current life. And they're shocked at this memory that came up, or this event or this thing that happened in their life. They hadn't thought of it since they were 5 years old or something. Mm-hmm. And it's the key. It's
right.
the reason for, the ongoing, their allergies is a good one. Like you can actually tap and collapse allergies. Mm-hmm. If it goes back. Yeah, to core childhood beliefs or traumatic events that are still, and this is what I tell people too. People will say, well, in the course of my life, they say, first of all, how can a human being avoid these kinds of big and little T traumas, these bad things? I say, well, you can't.
That's right.
They come with the territory called Earth. But I also say we are built in such a way, emotionally, psychologically, energetically, however you want to look at it, to be able to we're going along, something happens, we have our reaction to what happened, and then we complete the process of processing through that reaction, and then we're back to baseline and we continue on. That's kind of what we're supposed to do. So if you think of grieving, for example, you lose a loved one, you go into grief. Grief is a very natural process, but we are not meant to be stuck in grief forever. We are meant to move through grief. It's a journey. It's a personal journey. Everyone goes through it in their own way, but you are meant to come out the other side.
Right.
Okay. As with grief, with a lot of different things, when something about what happened overwhelms our coping capacity to the point where we actually get stuck in step 3, we can't process it. We can't move on. Even though time marches on in our unconscious mind, that event is still happening. It's like a loop. It's like a Groundhog Day kind of stuck on repeat. So not all the things we've been through that are bad are like this. But if you access something that happened to you, that something in the past that was quite a while ago, and you still feel an emotional intensity when you think about it, to me, that tells me it is still being experienced in the present in your unconscious mind, which doesn't have a sense of time, linear time. And we can rescue you what's happening and bring you back to the future where you belong, back to the present, I should say.
Yes. Couple of things that you said that I had some shifts on is when you said you can't bring it back up. When I used EFT the most diligently, I sought somebody out, we went through the whole thing. It was for stage fright. And I took my stage fright down from, it wasn't super intense, but it was maybe an 8 or 9, and I just didn't like dealing with that much sensation. So I worked with somebody and we brought it down to about a 3. And at that point I thought, good enough for me. I can manage a 3 and I can still freak myself out. And standing backstage, I will oftentimes do some tapping. But you made me realize, I bet I'm not done. I bet there's another layer because I can still bring it up.
Absolutely. You're not done. And this SUD level thing, I was just talking about this on a webinar yesterday or 2 days ago. So we use the scale of 0 to 10, 10 being the most intensely that you could feel that emotion about that thing, and 0 is it's gone. And so often with clients, we'll start tapping on something like, say, for example, with your stage fright. So if I was working with you and I said, let's say you've got to do a presentation in front of 2,000 people a week from now, And thinking about it makes your heart start to race, makes your throat constrict, makes you feel like your stomach's churning. And I would say, what's the intensity of that when you think about having to do that presentation? And you might say, it's an 8 or a 9. So we would start tapping, and then it might drop down to a 7 with the first round. And then what happens is, so often clients will go, I'll say, okay, check in, take a deep breath. How do you feel now? And they'll go, oh my God, I feel so much better. Wow. It's like, wow, I just feel so, it's like hardly even there. And I'll say, what's the number now on a scale of 1 to 10? And they just go, it's like hardly anything. And I persist because I know. I say, can you just give a number? Just throw out a number. And they go, oh, it's like 4 or 5. It's nothing. Okay. 4 or 5 seems like nothing compared to 9 where you were. Right. It's important to get the number because EFT can have such a rapid effect. 2-3 rounds of EFT can take 3 minutes? Mm-hmm. And so you feel like, I'm ready to go. Well, see, I wouldn't have left you with that 3 because we're talking maybe another 10 minutes. Unless, of course, the little bit of remaining intensity that you have left goes back to a core belief. And core beliefs are short, devastating statements that run our lives that usually get programmed in, as you would know as a hypnotherapist, in those early years, in those early formative years. And they usually sound like things like, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm bad. I'm not lovable. Life's unfair. It's not safe. And you can't really predict or diagnose what core belief you've got running. But often when an intensity level stays somewhere like a 3, for example, and it isn't dropping the rest of the way, I would pull out my little wizard toolbox and figure out, what do you have running?
What's going on? Exactly.
Why is that 3 not moving? And it might go back to, you fell off your tricycle when you were 3 years old, and all the neighborhood kids laughed and pointed at you, which we call little t trauma, which is, for anybody listening who hasn't heard these terms before, because I don't want to just use a bunch of terms and have it not actually mean anything to anybody. Big T trauma is the stuff that everyone agrees, oh yeah, 100%, that's trauma. It's all the big ones that you can imagine, abuse, physical trauma, whether it's, everybody knows what kinds of things those are. Little t trauma is the things that's only traumatic to you because you're small. You don't have a lot of resources when you're little. Falling off your tricycle and having everybody point and laugh at you can register in your body and in your brain as trauma. And for you, it's traumatic and you're stuck. You've got a part of you is a 5-year-old or 3-year-old lying on the sidewalk crying and feeling humiliated. When no matter how old you are, you could be 60 and you have a little 3-year-old part of you. And EFT goes in and revisits that memory and rescues that 3-year-old, helps you to move through that experience and collapse that trauma.
And thank you for so concisely explaining the difference between big T trauma and the little t trauma, because we all are traumatized by different things, and something that impacts me may not impact you. And just for example, I am running a 90-day coaching program that requires people to get on Zoom and show their face. To me, I'll get on Zoom anytime. I don't care how I look, it's fine. I'm fine with that. I was working with people in my program who are severely traumatized just by the idea of turning their camera on. And it's not to say I'm right and they're wrong, or they're right and I'm wrong. There is a trauma there, and exposing themselves in that way is traumatic to them. And it's okay. We can all have our own trauma, and it's okay that it's not a problem for somebody else. If it's a problem for us, it is a problem for us, and we are perfectly justified doing that. And I think the relevant question then becomes, what do I want to do with it? Do I want to stick with it and feel however I'm feeling? Or do I want to tap through it and bring myself back around to that normal state, that healthy